It was supposed to be a normal family dinner, or at least that's what I thought when I showed up. My 12-year-old son sat next to me, quietly pushing food around on his plate. Across the table, my sister Stephanie acted like she owned the place. She always did. She leaned back in her chair with that smug look I knew too well. My parents hovered over her like she was some kind of queen, while I was the extra guest who should be grateful for a seat. I kept my head down at first. I wasn't there to fight. I was there because my mother called and said Dad wasn't doing well, that the family needed to eat together. So I went. I wore my Air Force uniform straight from base, because I didn't even have time to change. That alone got me a few side eyes from Stephanie, like wearing a uniform at a dinner table was some kind of crime. The food was fine, if you could ignore the tension. My father barely looked at me. When he did, it was with that disappointed glare he'd been perfecting since I was a teenager. My mom kept fussing over Stephanie, refilling her wine glass, asking if she wanted more salad. My son sat there, polite, quiet, and probably wondering why we bothered coming. And then, it happened. Stephanie slammed her fork down and leaned toward me, her voice sharp enough to cut through the whole room. "You and your kid are just freeloaders." The table went silent. My son froze. I looked at her, waiting for her to backtrack, but she didn't. She doubled down. "Yeah, you heard me. You think you're better than us because you wear a uniform? Please. You're nothing. You've been living off this family, dragging your son along, and acting like you're some kind of hero." I almost laughed. The absurdity was too much. Freeloaders? From the woman living rent-free under a roof I paid for? From the same sister who burned through every dime of our grandfather's inheritance while I was grinding through ROTC just to get a shot at college? My kid and I, freeloaders? That was rich. My mom didn't say a word, she just smirked, like Stephanie had said something clever. My dad finally decided to join in, shaking his head like I'd embarrassed him just by existing. And all of this was happening inside the house I bought. My name was on the deed. Every brick, every window, every inch of that place was mine. And they were sitting there eating my food, drinking my wine, calling me a freeloader. I put my fork down slowly. No yelling, no tears, no scene. I just looked Stephanie dead in the eye and said, "Don't ever use my son as leverage again." Her smirk cracked for half a second, then came back. "What are you gonna do? Throw us out?" she said, laughing under her breath. That was the moment I knew I wasn't going to let this slide. Not anymore. Not after years of being treated like the backup plan, the one who had to sacrifice so Stephanie could shine. Not after being told to hand over my future so she could play businesswoman with other people's money, and definitely not after she humiliated my son at my own table. The silence in that room was heavy. You could hear the clock ticking in the hallway. My son looked at me, wide-eyed, waiting for me to say more. Stephanie leaned back like she'd won. My parents avoided my gaze, pretending they didn't just let their oldest daughter trash me and their grandson in the middle of dinner. And right there, I decided this was the line. This was the night everything shifted. If you've ever had family call you names, dismiss you, or try to cut you down in front of your own kid, you know exactly how that moment feels. Drop a comment and tell me if you've been there. And if you don't want to miss stories like this, hit subscribe now. I picked up my napkin, folded it neatly, and placed it on the table. "This dinner's over," I said quietly, standing up. My son followed without hesitation. Stephanie rolled her eyes like she'd forced me out again, like this was another win for her. But what she didn't realize was that she had just handed me the perfect reason to stop holding back. I walked out of that dining room, not with defeat, but with clarity. For the first time in years, I knew exactly what I had to do. And once I made up my mind, there was no turning back. The night air hit my face as I stepped outside, sharper than I expected, but it cleared my head instantly. My son walked beside me, silent, sensing the storm under my skin. That kind of clarity doesn't just appear out of nowhere. It comes from years of being pushed aside, from scars you think you've buried. And mine went all the way back to when I was 18. I had just graduated high school. My grandfather, the only person in that family who believed in me, left me $120,000 in his will. He'd told me more than once, "Miranda, this is for your future, don't let anyone take it from you." He knew exactly what kind of people my parents and sister were. I held that inheritance like it was my ticket to freedom. College acceptance letter in one hand, savings account in the other, I thought I was finally on my way. Then came the night I'll never forget. I was sitting in the living room with my acceptance packet spread across my lap, excited, nervous, hopeful. My dad walked in with that no-nonsense look, arms crossed, and my mom right behind him. Stephanie didn't even bother to show up, she didn't need to. They spoke for her. "We need your inheritance," my dad said flatly. No warm-up, no explanation, just a command. I blinked, confused. Need it for what? Mom wouldn't meet my eyes at first. Then she forced this awkward smile and said, "Your sister's starting a real estate business with your father. She needs capital. This is for the family, it's a sure thing, you'll get it back." I looked at my acceptance letter, then back at them. What about my college? That money was meant for me. "You can get loans," Dad snapped, as if loans were just free gifts from the universe. Mom nodded quickly, like that sealed the deal. "This is for the family," she repeated, her voice tighter this time. That word family. It never included me. It always meant Stephanie. I tried to argue, I really did. I said I'd work, I'd save, I'd find a way to contribute without giving up everything. But my dad's voice cut me off. "Stop being selfish. This is bigger than you." Selfish. That was the word they used when they wanted me to hand over my future so my sister could play entrepreneur. I signed the check over. I was 18, barely an adult, standing there with my parents towering over me, calling me selfish for not giving everything to Stephanie. They promised repayment. They promised I wouldn't regret it. And just like that, the money was gone. Within a year, the company collapsed. Bad deals, unpaid bills, debt stacked higher than their excuses. Stephanie moved on like nothing happened. My parents pretended the whole thing never existed. And me? I was left with nothing. No money, no apology, not even an acknowledgement that they had destroyed my chance at the life I wanted. So I adjusted. I applied for ROTC because it was the only way I could pay for college. It wasn't the path I'd planned, but it became the path I needed. I still remember the day I packed my things in an old duffel bag, my laptop, $500. No one stopped me as I walked out the front door. Not my parents, not my sister. They didn't even ask if I was safe. I dragged that bag down the cracked sidewalk, past houses glowing with family dinners and laughter. But none of it belonged to me. All I had was resentment and a determination that burned hotter than my fear. People like to say sacrifice makes you stronger. But back then, the only sacrifice was me. It's funny, Stephanie always bragged about her risks and investments. What she called ambition was just gambling with someone else's future. My future. And my parents backed her every time. When I signed my ROTC contract, I swore I wouldn't let anyone hold that kind of power over me again. I learned discipline, resilience, and how to fight through every obstacle without expecting backup. Because when your own family throws you to the wolves, you stop waiting for rescue. I put myself through school on 5 hours of sleep, juggling drills, classes, and side jobs. Every test felt like life or death. Every paycheck went to survival. I didn't party, I didn't waste time. I was too busy building a life they couldn't take from me again. And that's the part my sister never understood. She thought calling me a freeloader at that dinner table would humiliate me, but all it did was remind me of the years when I gave everything and got nothing. The irony was brutal. I was the one who sacrificed, who worked, who built a career serving this country. And she was the one sitting in my house, drinking my wine, calling me a burden. That memory of being 18, that was the fuel that lit the fire in me the night she opened her mouth at dinner. It wasn't just an insult. It was history repeating itself, and I wasn't going to let it happen again. Signing that ROTC contract felt like tossing myself into a fire just to see if I could walk out the other side. The first real test came during basic training. No one cared that I'd been cheated out of my inheritance or that I showed up with a chip on my shoulder the size of Texas. All they cared about was whether I could run 5 miles without dropping dead, whether I could carry 50 pounds of gear through mud, whether I could shut my mouth and follow orders. The morning started before the Sunday. By the time the bugle ripped through the barracks, my body was already screaming from the day before. Push-ups until my arms shook. Sit-ups until I thought I'd throw up. And then the running, always the running. They called it conditioning, I called it survival. I wasn't the fastest. I wasn't the strongest. But I refused to be the one who quit. And believe me, plenty of people did. One girl dropped out by week 3 after spraining her ankle. Another guy packed his bags because he couldn't handle the yelling. Every time someone disappeared, I reminded myself, you've been through worse. Getting screamed at by a drill sergeant was nothing compared to being told by your own parents that your dreams didn't matter. One day during field training, I collapsed face first into the dirt during a ruck march. My pack felt like it weighed more than I did. I couldn't breathe, my legs gave out, and I thought for sure that was it, I was done. Then I felt hands grab my straps. 2 cadets yanked me back to my feet. "Don't quit, Holt." One of them barked. "You're stronger than this." "How, Ted?" I pushed forward, every step agony, but I finished. That moment burned into me. For the first time in years, someone wasn't telling me I was selfish or useless. They were telling me I was strong. And they were right. College life with ROTC was no picnic either. Mornings started with PT, afternoons with classes, evenings with study groups. On top of that, I worked part-time jobs to cover anything scholarships and stipends didn't. While other students partied on Friday nights, I was folding uniforms, shining boots, and cramming for exams. My dorm room smelled like instant coffee and shoe polish. There were nights I thought about quitting. Nights when exhaustion pressed so hard on my chest that I felt like I couldn't breathe. But then I remembered the look on my parents' faces when they told me to hand over my inheritance. I remembered my sister's smirk, the way she always got what she wanted while I was expected to scrape by. And I knew quitting would prove them right. That anger kept me moving. That pride kept me steady. By the time graduation rolled around, I wasn't just surviving, I was thriving. Commissioning as a logistics officer wasn't glamorous. Nobody writes Hollywood movies about the people who track shipments, coordinate fuel lines, or make sure troops get supplies on time. But let me tell you, without logistics, the whole machine falls apart, and I was damn good at it. My first real deployment was in Florida after a hurricane ripped through the coast, homes flattened, roads washed out, families stranded without food or water. My unit rolled in with trucks full of supplies, and it was my job to make sure they got where they needed to go. Chaos everywhere, but we kept things moving. At one point, a convoy almost got trapped by flooding. Drivers panicked, radios crackled, people shouted over each other. I took a breath, gave clear orders, and rerouted them to higher ground just in time. If I'd hesitated, we would have lost trucks and supplies, maybe even lives. That was the moment I realized just how much weight my decisions carried. Later, when I deployed to Kuwait, the stakes were different but just as real. The desert heat cooked you alive, and every mission felt like a test of endurance. Supplies had to reach forward operating bases, and one screw-up meant troops went without. There were no second chances. Logistics officers don't get applause, but when the job's done right, soldiers eat, vehicles move, and missions succeed. That was enough for me. Through it all, I built a reputation. Reliable. Steady. The one who got things done. Commanders noticed. Promotions followed. By my early 30s, I was wearing captain's bars and training younger officers who looked at me the way I once looked at my mentors. But here's the kicker. Back home, none of that mattered. I could save convoys, deliver aid, and run operations under pressure most civilians couldn't even imagine, and my family still acted like I was the screw-up. To them, Stephanie's failed business ventures were somehow more impressive than a decade of military service. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was coordinating missions halfway across the world, making sure entire units stayed alive, while my own family couldn't bother to say, "We're proud of you." They didn't see discipline. They didn't see leadership, they only saw the girl they'd once bullied into giving up everything for her sister. And that's why the insult at that dinner table cut so deep, not because it was new, but because it was the same script they'd been running since I was 18. They never saw me for who I'd become. But this time, I wasn't going to let them write the ending. The applause from my last promotion ceremony still rang in my ears as I drove home, but I knew better than to expect any of it from my own family. Commanders clapped, peers shook my hand, younger officers asked me for advice. Back in Richmond, though, none of that meant a thing. When I called my mom to tell her I'd been promoted to captain, she barely reacted. "That's nice, dear," she said, her voice flat, as if I'd told her I bought a new coffee maker. Then, without skipping a beat, she launched into a story about Stephanie's latest project. Apparently my sister was trying her hand at staging houses for real estate. No business license, no investors, just Stephanie posting pictures of other people's living rooms on Instagram and calling herself a CEO. Dad chimed in, saying, "She's really building something special. We're so proud of her hustle." Hustle? That's what they called it? I'd been hauling convoys through floods and sandstorms, coordinating operations that kept troops alive, and they were gushing over Stephanie rearranging throw pillows. It wasn't just the phone calls either. The local news station ran a segment one night about the relief mission I'd coordinated in Florida. The camera panned to me, uniform crisp, explaining supply routes. I thought, maybe, just maybe, they'd finally notice. Instead, my parents changed the channel halfway through. My dad grumbled that the volume was too loud, and my mom said Stephanie had a new live video she didn't want to miss. That's how it always went. I could be halfway across the world making life or death decisions, and to them, I was still the background character. Meanwhile, Stephanie got parades for showing up late to family dinners or bragging about whatever scheme she was cooking up. It got worse at holidays. Thanksgiving turned into Stephanie's one-woman show. She'd waltz in wearing some overpriced outfit, talking about her business empire, as if failing 3 times already was just part of the brand. My parents would beam at her like she'd cured cancer, while I sat there carving turkey, invisible in uniform. One year, I'd just returned from deployment in Kuwait. I was jet-lagged, exhausted, but proud. I wore my service dress uniform because I'd come straight from base. When I walked through the door, my mom's first words weren't "welcome home" or "we missed you." They were, "Oh, you wore that again." As if my uniform was tacky compared to Stephanie's new dress. Stephanie smirked across the table. "You know, if you'd spent less time in the desert and more time networking, maybe you'd actually have a life by now." Everyone laughed except me. My son, only 10 at the time, looked around confused, not understanding why his mom's achievements were treated like a punchline. That's when I realized it wasn't just about me anymore. They weren't just dismissing my service, they were teaching my kid that what I did didn't matter. That hit harder than anything else. The double standard was so obvious it would have been funny if it hadn't been my life. Stephanie could set money on fire and be applauded for her ambition. I could earn medals, promotions, and respect from people who actually understood discipline, and it barely earned a shrug at home. Still, I stayed polite. I swallowed my anger. I told myself it wasn't worth the fight. But every smirk, every eye roll, every dismissive comment stacked on top of the years I'd already lost to their favoritism. By the time I hit my early 30s, I was decorated, respected, and considered reliable by commanders who trusted me with missions worth millions. But in the Holt family, I was still the kid they'd pushed aside for Stephanie. They didn't see the officer, the leader, the single mom balancing it all. They saw someone who was supposed to sacrifice without complaint. And the truth was, I let them. For too long, I played along, acting like their approval mattered. I told myself it didn't bother me, that my career and my son's happiness were enough. But deep down, the resentment kept growing. That dinner where Stephanie called me a freeloader didn't come out of nowhere. It was built on years of these little digs, years of watching them celebrate her while pretending I didn't exist. That insult was just the loudest version of what they'd been saying all along. I drove back to base after that Thanksgiving, thinking about how warped it all was. Here I was, serving my country, holding a rank that meant something, and they still made me feel like the underachiever. The thought was laughable, except it wasn't funny. It was exhausting. The irony? I didn't even want their approval anymore. Not really. I just wanted them to admit the truth, that I had carried myself without their help, that I had done what Stephanie never could stand on my own. But if they weren't willing to give me that recognition, then fine. I'd stop looking for it. What I didn't know yet was how quickly they'd turn that old script against me again, how fast they'd show me that in their eyes, I'd always be the backup plan. And this time, they weren't just asking for applause. They wanted something bigger. The phone lit up on my kitchen counter just as I was chopping vegetables for dinner. I saw the name on the screen, Mom. She never called unless something was wrong. My first instinct was to let it go to voicemail, but something in me said, pick it up. Her voice shook, more dramatic than I'd ever heard it. Miranda, it's your father. He's sick. Really sick. I froze for a second, knife still in my hand. She didn't wait for me to respond. And the bank is foreclosing. We're $300,000 behind, we're losing the house. There it was. The hook in the bait. My chest tightened, but not from sympathy. 300,000? How the hell did you get that far behind? She sighed into the phone. Your father and Stephanie tried another project. It didn't work out. The point is, we need help. You're doing so well. You have a stable job, benefits, security. Please, you have to step in. Your family. That word again. Family. They always pulled it out like a trump card when they needed me to foot the bill. I leaned against the counter, staring at my son's backpack by the door. His science project stuck out the top, covered in duct tape because we couldn't afford a new one after the last move. And here was my mother, asking me to cover nearly $300,000 because Stephanie and Dad couldn't resist another sure thing. What exactly do you expect me to do? I asked flatly. You could cover at least $200,000, she said quickly, as if she'd rehearsed it. It's the least you can do for family. My blood simmered. The least I can do? After years of sending money home during deployments, after giving up my own inheritance at 18, now they wanted me to write a six-figure check like it was pocket change? I set the knife down and rubbed my temple. I have responsibilities. I have Dylan. I can't just throw away money because you and Stephanie made bad bets. There was a pause, then the voice I knew too well, my father's. Weak, but still sharp enough to cut. You've always been selfish, Miranda. We gave you everything. And now, when we need you, you turn your back. I laughed bitterly. Everything? You took my future and handed it to Stephanie, and you want to lecture me about selfishness? Mom rushed to smooth it over, her voice rising. Please, don't start. This is about family, not old arguments. We're desperate. That word desperate sat heavy in the air. Desperate enough to call the daughter they ignored, insulted, dismissed, but never desperate enough to admit they'd been wrong. Later that week, I drove down to Richmond. The house looked smaller than I remembered, paint peeling, grass overgrown. It reeked of neglect, inside and out. I stepped through the door and was hit with the smell of stale coffee and mildew. Dad sat in the living room, frail but still wearing that stubborn glare. Mom hovered, wringing her hands. And then Stephanie showed up late, sauntering in like she'd just returned from a spa trip. Designer purse, oversized sunglasses, smirk firmly in place. She didn't waste time. So, are you going to help or not? Because we can't keep stalling the bank forever. I clenched my jaw. Help? You mean bail you out? Again. She rolled her eyes. Don't play the victim, Miranda. You've got money. You're in the military. You've got benefits. Just write the check and quit acting like you're above us. End of. I wanted to walk out right then, but I didn't. I looked at my dad, pale and thin, and part of me, some old, wounded part, still wanted to do the right thing. Then my mother leaned in, her voice dropping to that icy tone she used when she wanted to wound me. You and your son are just freeloaders living off our sacrifices. The words sliced through me. Not because I believed them, but because she said them so easily. My son wasn't even in the room to defend himself, but they dragged him into their mess to get at me. I stood there, fists tight at my sides. Years of swallowed anger rushed back all at once. This wasn't just a plea for money. It was another attack, another way to remind me that in their eyes, I would never measure up. And that was the moment I knew something had shifted. They weren't going to change. They would keep using me until I finally snapped. And I was done waiting for their approval, done being their safety net. I looked straight at Stephanie. Don't ever use my son as leverage again. Her smirk twitched, but she didn't back down. Dad coughed into his hand like the argument bored him. Mom crossed her arms and muttered something about betrayal. But I didn't care anymore. That night, betrayal wasn't just history, it was alive and sitting in front of me. And for the first time, I was ready to treat it like the enemy it was. The drive into Richmond was quiet except for the sound of my son tapping his pencil against a notebook in the back seat. He didn't ask why we were going. He just looked out the window, eyes scanning the worn-down neighborhoods as we pulled into the street I grew up on. I hadn't been back in years, and nothing looked better for the time that had passed. The house sagged under the weight of neglect. Peeling paint, broken shutters, weeds crawling up the steps. It was a far cry from the place my grandfather once kept spotless. I parked the car and stared at it for a second longer than I should have, feeling that familiar knot in my chest. Inside, it was worse. The smell of dust and old food hit me immediately. Boxes stacked in corners, unopened bills scattered on the kitchen counter, curtains yellowed with age. I could hear the TV blaring in the living room where my dad sat in his recliner, pale, wrapped in a blanket. He looked smaller than I remembered, but his glare was just as sharp. "You came," he said, as if I'd been summoned, not invited. My mom hovered near him, fussing with the remote. "Don't just stand there, Miranda, sit down, we need to talk." I set my bag down and motioned for my son to follow me to the table. He slid into a chair quietly, eyes wide, probably wondering why his grandparents' house looked like a storage unit. Then Stephanie made her entrance. Late, as always. She walked in like she owned the place, clicking heels echoing on the tile, hair done up, sunglasses perched on her head even though we were indoors. She tossed her purse on the couch, looked straight at me, and smirked. "So," she said, dragging out the word. "Ready to help the family or not?" I took a breath, steady. "Help? You mean write a check and watch you burn through it like last time?" Her smile widened. "Don't be dramatic. This isn't about the past. This is about saving the house. Our house." I looked around. Our house? My name was on the deed. Every bill, every mortgage payment, every piece of paperwork had my signature, not hers. "This isn't your house, Stephanie," I said evenly. "It's mine. I bought it back from the bank." Her jaw tightened for half a second before she recovered. "Details. You wouldn't even have that without us." That was it. The audacity was unbelievable. I built everything I had on my own, while she and my parents treated me like a backup plan, and now she wanted credit for the roof over her head. Dinner was set out, though no one bothered to make it look nice. Just plates slapped on the table, cold food, half-empty bottles of wine. We sat down, the tension thicker than the gravy. My dad picked at his food, my mom tried to act like this was just another family meal, and Stephanie kept shooting me little glances like she was waiting for me to explode. Then she dropped the bomb. She slammed her fork down, leaned across the table, and spat the words with venom. "You and your kid are just freeloaders." The sound of her voice cut through the room. My son froze, fork halfway to his mouth. My stomach turned, not from the insult to me I'd heard worse, but because she dragged him into it. My kid, the one person who had nothing to do with their failures, was now her target. I set my fork down slowly, no rush, no theatrics. I looked her straight in the eye. "Don't ever use my son as leverage again." She laughed, sharp and cruel. "What are you gonna do? Throw us out? Please. You wouldn't dare." The room went silent. My mom sipped her wine like she hadn't heard anything. My dad muttered something about me being ungrateful. My son looked at me, scared but trusting, waiting to see if I'd protect him the way they never protected me. And in that moment, I made a decision. This wasn't just about insults anymore. This wasn't about grudges from when I was 18. This was about the line they had just crossed. They thought I was weak because I stayed quiet. They thought my military career, my discipline, my ability to survive anything meant I'd also survive their abuse forever. They were wrong. I stood, napkin folded neatly in my hand, and placed it on the table. "Dinner's over," I said calmly. My son followed me, his chair scraping against the floor. Stephanie's laugh trailed after us. "Yeah, walk away. That's all you're good at." I didn't give her the satisfaction of a response. I walked out of that house with my son at my side, not in defeat, but with something sharper. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't just angry. I was ready. The night air outside that house felt heavy, but not heavier than the look on my son's face. He stayed close to me, clutching his backpack straps like he wanted to disappear. He didn't ask questions, but I could see it. He'd heard every word. I crouched down by the car before we got in. "Hey," I said softly. None of what she said was true. "You're not a freeloader, you're my son, and you're the best thing I've got." He nodded, small and stiff, but I could tell the insult had already sunk in. That's the thing about family betrayal, it doesn't just scar you, it seeps into the people you love if you don't cut it off fast. By the time we drove back to the hotel, I had already made up my mind. I wasn't letting this slide. They could trash me all they wanted, but dragging my kid into it? That was the line. The next morning, my phone buzzed nonstop. Stephanie had apparently decided last night's show wasn't enough. She'd posted a rant on Facebook about me. I didn't even need to click "See More" to know how bad it was. The first line read, "Some people pretend to serve their country, but really they just use it as an excuse to avoid helping their family." The comments were brutal. Her friends piled on, calling me heartless, selfish, even accusing me of abandoning my dad. My mom had liked the post. My dad had commented, "She doesn't care about us." But the part that made my stomach turn was when she dragged my son into it. She hides behind that kid like he's a shield. He's just as spoiled as she is. That was the moment my anger turned cold. You can attack me all day. You can call me selfish, you can rewrite history, you can play the victim online. But the second you start targeting my son, you cross into territory you can't come back from. I showed the post to Dylan, thinking maybe I could get ahead of it. He saw his name and frowned. "Why would Aunt Stephanie say that?" "I didn't do anything." I pulled him close. "Because she wants to hurt me, and she thinks going after you is the best way. But you didn't do anything wrong. Don't you ever believe her?" He nodded, but I could see the confusion in his eyes. Kids don't forget moments like that. And I knew I had to make sure he never carried that shame with him. So I started documenting everything. Screenshots of her posts, copies of the comments. Even the text messages she'd sent me the night before, calling me military trash and accusing me of abandoning the family. Years of training had taught me to be meticulous, and I treated this no differently than any mission I'd ever run. When I told a friend at base about it, she shook her head. "Miranda, she's crossing into defamation, you need to shut it down before it spirals." I already knew she was right, but it wasn't just about shutting Stephanie up, it was about sending a message my son wasn't their punching bag, and neither was I. Later that week, I went back to the house one more time, mostly because I wanted to look them in the eye. My mom opened the door, already scowling. "You coming to your senses yet?" I walked past her without answering. Stephanie was on the couch, scrolling her phone like nothing was wrong. "You think it's funny?" I asked. She looked up, smirk glued in place. "What, telling the truth?" "Sorry if it hurts." I stepped closer, voice low, but steady. "You can say whatever you want about me, but if you drag my son into this again, you'll regret it." Her smirk faltered just enough to tell me she'd heard me, but then she shrugged. "Oh, please, everyone already knows you're cold. Now they know you're raising him the same way. That's not my fault." That was it. I didn't yell. I didn't throw anything. I just let the silence hang in the air until even she couldn't look at me. Then I turned to my parents, who sat watching, pretending like they weren't enjoying the show. "You sat there last night and let her humiliate me in front of my son. Now you're letting her smear him online. If you think I'm going to stand here and take it, you don't know me at all." No one spoke. My dad coughed into his hand. My mom muttered something about family loyalty. Stephanie crossed her legs and went back to scrolling. I walked out the door, but this time I wasn't leaving with nothing. I had proof, I had clarity. And most of all, I had the one thing they couldn't touch anymore, the determination to finally hold them accountable. I didn't waste time after that last confrontation. Years in the Air Force had taught me something simple: when the enemy shows their hand, you don't sit around waiting, you move, you plan, you strike with precision. The next morning, I was back on base with a folder stuffed full of screenshots, texts, and notes. I walked into the JAG office, knocked twice, and pushed the door open. Behind the desk sat Major Laura Bennett, one of the sharpest legal officers I'd ever met. We'd crossed paths before on deployment, and I trusted her more than anyone when it came to handling messes that blurred family and law. She raised an eyebrow when she saw the stack in my hands. "That looks like trouble." "Family trouble," I said, dropping it on her desk. "They're running their mouths online, calling me unfit, dragging my son into it, and they want me to pay their debts. I'm done playing nice." She flipped through the pages, eyes scanning quickly. "Jesus. They're reckless. Posting this stuff in public? Half of this could qualify as defamation." "That's what I figured," I said, sitting down. "But I don't just want them to stop, I want to cut them off at the knees. Legally. No more leverage, no more guilt trips." She leaned back, tapping her pen against the desk. "Then we go after the house." "You said the mortgage was in default?" I nodded. "Bank's ready to foreclose. I've got the savings and investments to cover the purchase. I want it clean. In my name. No way for them to claim it." Her eyes narrowed with approval. "Smart. You don't fight them on their terms, you change the battlefield. Once the deed is in your name, they're tenants at best. If they push, you've got the law on your side, and if they smear you again, we've got grounds for a cease and desist." That was the thing I loved about working with people like her. Straight to the point. No nonsense. It was like planning a mission: identify the objective, secure resources, execute. We spent hours drafting documents, purchase agreements, legal notices, certified letters. She walked me through every step like I was prepping for deployment. By the end of the afternoon, I had a roadmap that was cleaner than any supply chain I'd ever built. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with Dylan doing his homework across from me. He glanced up at the spread of papers, the highlighter marks, the neat rows of sticky notes. "Is this Air Force stuff?" he asked. "In a way," I said, smiling faintly. "Different mission, same kind of planning." He nodded like he understood more than he let on, and went back to solving math problems. The next few days were a blur of signatures and numbers. I met with the bank, pushed through the paperwork, and finalized the loan to cover the gap. Every signature felt like a nail in the coffin of their control over me. The final stamp, my name printed across the deed, felt better than any medal I'd ever pinned to my chest. When Laura slid the folder back across the desk, she said, "Congratulations, it's yours, now comes the fun part: telling them." We drafted the letter together. Calm, professional, sharp enough to cut through any excuse. They had 6 months to stay if they paid rent on time. Miss one payment, and they were out. No room for negotiation, no loopholes. Attached was a cease and desist covering the online garbage. I mailed the packet certified. 2 days later, my mother called. Her voice was pure venom. "You think you can control us with paperwork? You'll regret this, Miranda." I didn't flinch. "No, Mom. I think you'll regret underestimating me." There was silence on the line, then the familiar click of her hanging up when she realized she couldn't win. Stephanie tried her own tactic. She texted me one line. "You're ruthless." I stared at the screen for a moment before setting it down. If protecting my son and drawing a boundary made me ruthless, then so be it. I'd worn worse labels, and unlike Freeloader, this one actually made me smile. The shift in me was clear. For years, I'd let them define the terms. I was the one who bent, the one who sacrificed, the one who stayed quiet. Not anymore. Now, every move was calculated. Every document was a weapon. And for once, the battlefield wasn't tilted in their favor. That night, Dylan built a Lego ship at the coffee table, pieces scattered everywhere. He looked up and asked, "Are the storms over now?" I knelt beside him, steady. "Not yet. But we've got a map now. And that means we're not lost." He nodded, satisfied, and went back to building. I watched him, realizing this was what it meant to lead not just in uniform, but at home. To show him that no matter what anyone said, we had the power to set our own terms. The packet hit their mailbox on a Tuesday morning, certified and stamped. By lunchtime, my phone was already buzzing. I let it ring. If they wanted to talk, they could read the letter first. That evening, my dad finally called again. His voice wasn't tired or pleading this time, it was angry. "You think you can throw legal crap at us like we're strangers? We're your parents." I leaned back in my chair. Parents don't call their kid military trash online. Parents don't tell her son he's a freeloader. You crossed that line. I just drew it in ink. He sputtered, then snapped, "We gave you everything." I laughed, sharp and humorless. "No, you took everything, my inheritance, my respect, years of my service pay, and you still thought you had the right to spit on me. Now you get 6 months under my terms, pay rent or get out." For a long moment, all I heard was his breathing. Then the call cut off. The silence didn't last long. Stephanie was next, storming into my voicemail with a string of curses. She called me a wannabe officer playing landlord, and warned me I was destroying the family. I replayed the message twice, not because it hurt, but because it was solid evidence. The next day, I drove past the house. The curtains twitched when I slowed down. Part of me wanted to stop, walk up, and look them in the eyes. Instead, I kept going. I wasn't their audience anymore. The law was. Back on base, Laura, the JAG attorney, grinned when I played the voicemail for her. "That's gold," she said. "If they ignore the notice, we'll have no trouble in court. You've got them boxed in." It was surreal, flipping the script after all these years. They were used to me being the one cornered, too guilty to push back, too loyal to break away. Now they were the ones scrambling. And it felt good. Not petty, not cruel, just right. Stephanie didn't stop at voicemails, she doubled down online, whining to anyone who would listen that I was evicting my poor sick parents. But this time, the story didn't land. Neighbors who'd seen the screaming match at dinner left comments like, "Didn't look sick when he was yelling across the table." Veterans I'd served with started chiming in, backing me up. One of them even wrote, "Captain Holtz carried more weight for this country than her family ever did for her, don't twist it." That one nearly made me tear up. Not because I needed validation, but because for once, the truth wasn't just mine to carry. Meanwhile, Dylan watched it all unfold with quiet focus. One evening, as we ate takeout on the couch, he asked, "So, are Grandma and Grandpa really going to have to pay you rent?" "Yes," I said simply. "If they want to stay, they pay. If not, they move. That's how it works for everyone else in the world." He grinned, a little mischievous. "Like how I pay rent with chores." I laughed. "Exactly like that, except their rent is a lot more expensive than washing dishes." That moment lightened the weight, at least for us. But I knew the storm was still brewing on their end. Sure enough, by the weekend, my mom called again. This time, her voice was shaky, dripping with the kind of fake sadness she'd perfected over the years. "Miranda, honey, we're family. How could you do this to us? We just need help." I cut her off. Help doesn't look like spitting in my face and calling my son spoiled. Help doesn't look like stealing my future at 18. You don't get to rewrite history now that the bills are due. Her sigh rattled through the phone. "You've become so cold." "No, Mom," I said, calm and steady. "I've become clear." When I hung up, there was no rush of guilt, no pit in my stomach like when I was younger. Just relief. For the first time, I wasn't stuck defending myself. I was enforcing the rules. Over the next week, I had the house appraised, rental contracts drafted, and an account set up for payments. Everything above board, nothing they could twist. Laura reviewed it all and signed off. You've got a bulletproof setup, now it's just a matter of watching them squirm. That night, I stood in my kitchen, flipping through the final folder. The weight of it felt different than any uniform I'd worn, any mission I'd led. It wasn't medals or titles, it was control. Something they thought I'd never have. And as much as they hated it, as much as they screamed and schemed, the reality was simple, the battlefield had shifted. This was my house, my terms, my line in the sand. Stephanie must have thought she was clever when she hit post. By the time I checked my phone that Saturday morning, her face was already plastered across TikTok, red eyes, tissues in hand, voice cracking like she was auditioning for a soap opera. Please pray for my parents, she sniffled. My cold, military sister is evicting them. After everything they've done for her, she's leaving them homeless. We don't know where to go. We don't know what to do. Cue the dramatic music in the background. I almost expected subtitles and a GoFundMe link at the end. The comments poured in fast. At first, they were full of strangers calling me heartless, selfish, ungrateful. Some even said, how could anyone treat their own parents like that? I set my phone down, brewed a pot of coffee, and let them have their moment. If Stephanie wanted a performance, I wasn't going to be her audience. By mid-afternoon, though, the tide was already shifting. A neighbor chimed in, funny, I live across the street. Saw the dad screaming at her over dinner last month, didn't look homeless then. Another wrote, didn't that same sister post last year about buying a Lexus? Who exactly is broke here? And then came the big guns, my old squad mates. One by one, veterans I'd served with started weighing in. Captain Holt is the reason our convoy made it through a hurricane in Florida. Don't talk about her like she's heartless. She's carried more than her fair share. The more they spoke, the clearer the picture became. People started tagging Stephanie as manipulative, pointing out inconsistencies in her sob story. Someone even stitched her video with side-by-side screenshots, her crying on TikTok, and her Facebook post from 2 weeks earlier bragging about weekend wine tastings. That clip went more viral than her original. I didn't have to lift a finger. The truth had a way of digging itself out. Of course, Stephanie didn't take it well. By Sunday evening, she was on Instagram Live, trying to clarify. She claimed I had always been jealous, that I used my rank to bully the family. At one point, she even called me a government paper pusher who thinks she's a hero. That one actually made me laugh out loud. If logistics work was so meaningless, why did her entire family beg me to save their house? Meanwhile, Dylan was scrolling through the mess with wide eyes. Mom, he said, people are really fighting over us online. Not over us, I corrected. Over the story she's trying to sell. Let them fight about it, we'll stick to the facts. He nodded, a little relieved, and went back to building a Lego jet on the coffee table. Later that night, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't family, it was Laura, the attorney. She'd seen the posts too. They're handing you free evidence, she said. Every exaggeration, every lie, every contradiction screenshots go straight into your file. If we end up in court, this will save us hours. I couldn't help but grin. Stephanie thought she was building an army. What she'd really built was my case. By Monday morning, her video had attracted local reporters. A few reached out to me for comment. I declined interviews but sent them a single statement. The matter is legal and documented, any claims otherwise are false. Simple, direct, nothing to twist. When the first article ran, it wasn't flattering to her. They included her video but also quoted veterans who vouched for me, neighbors who called out her theatrics, and financial records showing the house was already under foreclosure before I stepped in. Stephanie had wanted the spotlight, and she got it. Just not the kind she liked. At work, a fellow officer slapped me on the shoulder. Saw you in the news. Gotta say, Holt, your sister should have picked a better enemy. TikTok doesn't stand a chance against a logistics officer with receipts. I laughed, shaking my head. I didn't even have to fight this one. She fought herself. But the real turning point came later that week, when Dylan's teacher pulled me aside after school. "He's handling this with such maturity," she said softly. "He told the other kids, 'My mom's not mean, she just doesn't let people use her anymore. You should be proud.'" Proud didn't even cover it. For years, I'd carried the weight of proving myself not just as a soldier, but as a daughter, a sister, a mother. Now, hearing my son defend me with such clarity, I realized I didn't need the world's approval, I already had his. Stephanie kept posting, but by then the damage was done. Her credibility was shot, her followers saw through the act, and her desperate jabs only made her look smaller. I didn't celebrate, I didn't need to. Watching the lies collapse under their own weight was satisfaction enough. That night, Dylan curled up next to me on the couch, his Lego jet finished, balanced carefully on the armrest. "So, do we win?" he asked. I smiled, wrapping an arm around him. "We don't need to win, we just need to live the truth, and that's exactly what we're doing." Boo! The noise outside could roar all it wanted. Inside, for once, there was peace. The fallout at home didn't take long. Word spreads fast in a small town, and my family wasn't immune. By midweek, my aunt called me, her voice low and careful, like she was handling live wires. "Miranda, I saw Stephanie's video, but I also saw the article. People are talking, some of the things, they don't make your parents look good." "Because they're not good," I said flatly. "Not to me. Not to Dylan." "Des." She sighed. "I don't know what to say. I love your dad, but I can't defend this. He shouldn't have said those things. And Stephanie, well, she's lost her mind." It wasn't just her. Other relatives stopped chiming in. The group chat that used to blow up during holidays went silent. Silence, I realized, was its own form of judgment. Back at the house, my parents and Stephanie must have been feeling the squeeze. Their neighbors weren't sympathetic anymore. A friend of mine who still lived nearby texted me. "Your mom was outside yelling at a reporter today. Whole street heard. It was a circus." Stephanie tried to drag Philip, our golden child brother, into the mess, but even he kept his distance. He hadn't shown up to any family dinners lately, and now he wasn't defending them online either. For a guy who loved attention, his silence spoke volumes. Then came the call I knew would happen eventually. My father. No bluster this time, no shouting. Just a tired, brittle voice. "Miranda, your mother's not taking this well, she says you've turned the whole town against us." I pinched the bridge of my nose. "I didn't turn anyone against you. You did that yourself when you called me and Dylan freeloaders." People just finally heard it. There was a pause long enough that I thought he'd hung up. Then, softer, almost like a stranger, he said, "You're really not going to help us, are you?" I wanted to scream. I wanted to ask how he could twist everything into me being the villain. But instead, I answered steady, "I already helped, I bought the house, I gave you terms, you spit on both, that was the help, you don't get to demand more." He muttered something I couldn't catch, then ended the call. That night, Dylan found me staring at the kitchen counter, my hands clenched around a coffee mug. "You okay, Mom?" he asked. I forced a smile. "Yeah. Just tired." But he didn't buy it. Kids never do. He set his Lego jet next to my mug and said, "You don't have to feel bad, they're the ones messing up, not you. Leave it to a 12-year-old to put it cleaner than any lawyer." The next day, Laura called with an update. "They're cracking," she said. "Your dad tried to argue they shouldn't owe you anything because family money is different. I reminded him the deed is in your name and the bank doesn't care about family money." He went quiet after that. There. I could picture it perfectly, his pride deflating like a punctured tire. But if my dad was showing cracks, my mom doubled down. She left me a voicemail later, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. "You'll regret this, Miranda. One day, Dylan will see what kind of person you are, a daughter who destroyed her family for money." I saved the message. Proof always mattered more than anger. Stephanie wasn't doing much better. With her online sympathy drying up, she started showing up at the house, less and less. My aunt told me she'd seen her screaming at my mom in the driveway, blaming her for letting things get out of control. The perfect united front they always bragged about, gone. And here's the irony, I didn't need to destroy them. They were doing it to themselves. Their alliances, their favoritism, their constant lies, they couldn't hold under real pressure. For the first time, they had to live with the consequences of their own choices. Meanwhile, Dylan and I were fine. More than fine. We were steady. Homework at the table, dinner on the stove, weekends at the park. My life wasn't in shambles, it was theirs. That contrast alone told the whole story. Still, I won't lie, there were moments when the weight pressed in. Like when Dylan asked if we'd ever have a normal family again. I told him the truth. This is normal, kiddo. Some families break, some don't. What matters is we've got each other. He nodded slowly, then smiled. Good enough for me. I hugged him tight, and for once, the guilt that used to gnaw at me was quiet. By the end of the month, even Philip finally texted me. Just 3 words, I get it. That was all. No apology, no details. But it was the closest thing to validation I'd ever gotten from him. And it was enough. The ties were fractured, the mask was off. And no matter how many crocodile tears Stephanie posted online, no matter how many voicemails my mom left, one fact remained unshakable: I wasn't the one breaking the family apart. They did that themselves. The letter from the bank arrived on a rainy Thursday. Not to me this time, it went straight to them. Foreclosure finalized, eviction clock ticking. My attorney forwarded me a copy, and for the first time, I realized the system was doing what I never could, holding them accountable. By the weekend, the storm hit full force. My aunt called again, her voice a mix of gossip and disbelief. Miranda, it's everywhere. Your mom's telling anyone who'll listen that they're being forced out. But people aren't buying it anymore. They're asking why Stephanie can't bail them out, since she's the one always bragging about her big commissions. I almost laughed. Stephanie's real estate success had always been smoke and mirrors. Fancy photos on Instagram, champagne at open houses, but behind the curtain, maxed out credit cards and unpaid dues. The truth was leaking out, and she couldn't plug the holes. That night, Dylan sat at the table doing homework while I skimmed through the latest online chatter. Stephanie had posted again, this time raging instead of crying. My sister doesn't care if our parents end up on the street. She just wants control, like she always has. The comments didn't go her way. Wait, didn't she buy the house with her own money? Sounds like you're mad your free ride is ending. If you hate her so much, why do you still live in her house? Stephanie tried clapping back, but every reply just made her look worse. Watching her unravel publicly was like watching a balloon deflate, loud at first, then pathetic. But the collapse wasn't just online. My lawyer called with another update. They've missed their first repayment deadline. That triggers the default clause. We can move forward with eviction immediately. I nodded, steady. Do it. No extensions. She gave me a look, even through the phone. You're sure? I've been sure for years, I said. The sheriff's notice went up on their front door the following week. Bright, official, impossible to ignore. My cousin texted me a photo. My mother was standing on the porch, arms crossed, eyes blazing, while Stephanie tried to yank the notice down. Neighbors gathered, watching. Nobody stepped in to help. That image stuck with me, the 3 of them, furious and cornered, while the world kept turning without their drama. A few days later, my father called one last time. His voice was smaller than I'd ever heard it. We don't have anywhere to go. Your mother, she's not handling this. Can't you? No, I cut in. You made choices. I made mine. You called me selfish when I was 18. Maybe you'll finally understand what selfish really looks like. There was no shouting, no defense. Just a long silence, and then the click of him hanging up. Stephanie didn't even try with me, she turned her rage on my mom instead, blaming her for losing the house to Miranda. My aunt said the fights got so loud the neighbors could hear through the walls. The golden family image was gone, shredded in public. And here's the kicker, I didn't have to lift a hand. I didn't have to yell, threaten, or gloat. The collapse came naturally, like gravity pulling down something that was always too unstable to stand. Dylan noticed the change in me, too. One evening, as we walked back from the park, he said, "You don't look mad anymore." I smiled at him. Because I'm not. I don't have to be. The truth is finally louder than the lies. He grinned, skipping ahead a little, his backpack bouncing. That small moment reminded me what mattered most, not their downfall, but our peace. A week later, movers were hauling furniture out of the house. Stephanie shouted at them, my mom cried, my dad slumped in a chair. Neighbors watched from across the street, whispering. I wasn't there, but photos made their way to me. My family had always cared so much about appearances, about looking perfect to outsiders. Now their humiliation was the headline. The house was mine, officially and fully, stripped of their grip. And while they scrambled for couches to sleep on and relatives to guilt trip, I signed the lease with a young couple excited to make it their first home. Rent payments started flowing straight into Dylan's college fund. That was the sweetest part. Their collapse didn't just end their control over me, it secured my son's future. And as for me, I slept better than I had in years. No late-night phone calls, no guilt, no fear of their next demand, just quiet, just freedom. The empire they built on favoritism, lies, and entitlement was gone. And all it took was a piece of paper with my name on the deed. The call came 2 days after the movers cleared out. No surprise, it was Stephanie. Her voice was already shrill before I could even say hello. You think you've won, don't you? You've destroyed this family. I stepped outside onto the porch, phone pressed to my ear, breathing in the cool evening air. No, Stephanie. I didn't destroy anything. You, Mom, and Dad did that all on your own. She snapped back instantly. You don't get to talk to me like that. You're nothing without us. You've always been nothing. Just a soldier with no life, hiding behind a uniform. I actually laughed. That uniform, you're mocking? It's the reason you're still living in a country where you can whine on TikTok without consequences. Her silence told me I'd hit the mark, then, right on cue, she screamed louder. You and your kid are freeloaders. You've always leeched off this family. Without Dad and Mom, you'd be homeless. That line, that recycled, poisonous line, should have cut deep. Instead, it rolled right off me. My voice stayed even. Funny you'd say that while living in my house rent-free for years. Remind me again who the real freeloader is? She sputtered, and I could practically hear her face turning red through the phone. I hope you're happy, she hissed. Mom cries every night, Dad's sick. And you just sit there pretending you're better than us. I don't pretend, Stephanie, I said. I am better than this. Better than screaming at a sister who bought the roof over my head. Better than mocking a child to get my way. Better than lying to the world because I can't face the truth. For a moment, there was nothing but static between us. I almost thought she'd hung up. Then she shrieked, I hate you, you're not my sister. I leaned against the porch railing, calm. Good. Because you've never acted like one. That must have landed because the next sound was just ragged breathing and then the slam of her hanging up. I didn't smile, didn't gloat. Instead, I felt something I hadn't expected: relief. That scream, that fury, it was her last card. And I hadn't matched her rage. I'd stayed steady. For once, I hadn't been dragged into the mud with her. Inside, Dylan looked up from the couch when I walked in. Everything okay? Yeah, I said, ruffling his hair. Everything's more than okay. But of course, Stephanie wasn't done showing off in public. The very next day, she showed up at my townhouse. She didn't knock, she banged. Loud enough that the neighbor's dog started barking. When I opened the door, there she was, hair wild, eyes red, standing in the rain like some bad movie scene. You ruined everything, she screamed. This was supposed to be our family home. I kept one hand on the doorframe, blocking her from even stepping inside. Correction. It's my house. My deed. My rules. You never had a claim to it. "You heartless witch," she shouted, water dripping from her mascara. "You think your little army career makes you better than us? You'll die alone, you know that? Alone, just like you deserve." I didn't flinch. Alone is still better than surrounded by people who only show up to take. Her jaw dropped like she couldn't believe I'd said it out loud. But it was the truth. She tried one last jab, pointing at me with shaking hands. "You'll regret this. Dylan will grow up hating you. He'll see what you really are." That's when Dylan's voice came from behind me, calm, clear, louder than hers. "I already know what she is. She's my mom, and she's nothing like you." Stephanie froze. For a second, her mouth opened like she wanted to fight a 12-year-old. But no words came out. She turned, stomped down the walkway, and disappeared into the rain. I shut the door, locked it, and turned back to Dylan. He shrugged, casual. "Guess she's not coming back, huh?" "Not here," I said softly. "Not ever." That night, I sat on the couch with him, both of us wrapped in blankets, the house quiet except for the hum of the heater. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace, not the kind that comes from winning a fight, but the kind that comes from finally ending one. The confrontation was over. And it hadn't been about shouting her down. It had been about refusing to give her power over me anymore. I didn't destroy the family. I didn't ruin her life. I just stopped letting them ruin mine. The first morning in months that felt quiet wasn't anything special. No grand fireworks, no dramatic victory. Just me and Dylan eating scrambled eggs at the kitchen table while sunlight poured through the blinds. And yet, it felt like the first breath I'd taken in years. Life didn't stop because my parents and sister finally hit their wall. Bills still came, laundry still piled up, Dylan still forgot to put his shoes by the door. But the weight I'd carried for decades, the guilt, the obligation, the endless cycle of giving without respect, that was gone. The house they'd lost? It wasn't a wound anymore. It was an asset. Rent from the young couple who moved in was already hitting my account, and every deposit went straight into Dylan's college fund. I showed him the numbers one night, his eyes wide as he realized the math. "So, this is really all for me?" he asked. "All for you," I said, "for your future, for the life no one will ever take away from you." He hugged me so hard I almost dropped my laptop. That kind of hug meant more than any applause, any rank, any medal. Work on base rolled on as usual, but even there, people noticed. A colleague caught me in the hall after a briefing. "You look lighter," she said. "Whatever storm you went through, it's gone from your face." She wasn't wrong. For years I'd buried myself in military order and discipline, trying to balance the chaos of family drama with the structure of my career. Now, for the first time, I didn't feel like I was living two lives. I was just living mine. One weekend, Dylan and I drove back past the old neighborhood. He wanted to see the house, not because he missed it, but because he was curious. The lawn was mowed, curtains drawn neatly, kids' bikes scattered on the driveway. Laughter spilled through an open window. "That's how it should have been all along," Dylan said quietly. I nodded. "And now it is. Just not with us inside." We didn't linger. We didn't need to. The past was a closed chapter. Instead, we started planting our own roots. Literally. I took Dylan to the nursery and let him pick flowers for our backyard. He chose marigolds, bright, stubborn little blooms that thrive almost anywhere. "They're tough," he said, "like us." Now. We spent the afternoon with dirt under our nails, arranging pots and laughing every time the hose sprayed the wrong direction. By the time we finished, the yard looked alive in a way it never had before. That night, as we sat outside watching the sun dip low, I realized the flowers weren't just for him, they were for me too. A reminder that growth can come after storms, and beauty doesn't ask permission from anyone. Even with the peace, I didn't fool myself into thinking everything was perfect. There were still moments when old guilt tried to creep in. A random song, a smell of coffee like my mom used to make, a memory of my dad bragging about Stephanie at the dinner table while ignoring me completely. But those thoughts didn't anchor me anymore. They just passed through, like clouds moving across the sky. Dylan noticed that too. One evening he said, "You don't get mad when you talk about them now." And I don't need to, I told him. I already won the only fight that mattered, keeping us safe. That's what this whole mess came down to, not revenge, not proving a point, not even winning some argument from years ago. It was about drawing a line, protecting my son, and finally protecting myself. My parents and Stephanie? They'll spin their stories until the day they die. But it doesn't matter anymore. The truth already outlived their lies. A few weeks later, at a ceremony on base, I stood in uniform as they pinned a commendation on my chest. Dylan sat in the audience, grinning so wide I thought his face might split in two. When the applause echoed, I didn't look for my parents. I didn't search for approval. I looked at him. My son. My reason. My family. Afterward, as we walked to the car, he said, "That was cool, you looked really strong up there." I laughed. Strong's not about medals, kid. It's about saying no when everyone expects you to cave. He thought about that for a minute, then nodded like he understood more than I expected. Back at home, we watered the marigolds before heading inside. The blooms were already starting to spread, stubborn and bright. Dylan pointed at them and said, "Told you they were tough." I smiled, watching him race up the porch steps. He was right. They were tough. And so were we. No screaming matches, no guilt trips. No more begging for scraps of love that were never going to come. Just me and my son, building a life that was ours alone. For the first time, I wasn't living under anyone else's shadow. And that quiet, steady, unshakable, that was freedom. Looking back, it wasn't about winning some loud fight or proving myself to people who never wanted to see me. It was about refusing to let their choices define me anymore. For the first time, I learned that strength doesn't always look like shouting the loudest. It looks like walking away with your head high and protecting what matters most. Dylan and I built a new chapter from the ground up, and that's the real victory. Not revenge in the petty sense, but justice in knowing the truth stood tall when lies fell apart. Families can break, and sometimes blood ties bring more pain than comfort. But family drama doesn't get the last word, you do. And if my story shows anything, it's that family revenge stories aren't about destruction. They're about drawing boundaries, claiming back your peace, and realizing that revenge stories can end not with rage, but with freedom. So if you've ever carried the weight of betrayal, or lived through your own family drama, know you're not alone. And if you want to hear more stories like this, real, raw, and unapologetic, make sure you hit subscribe. We've got more family revenge stories that remind us just how strong we can be when we stop letting others write our ending.